Hey friends, welcome back to the journal feed. My name is Nick Zelt, and this is the only place to get spoon-fed the latest and greatest of emergency medicine. Now, this is the audio version of the past week's summaries, which this week were brought to you by our authors Vivian Lay, Ketan Patel, Shannon Marcus, Colin O'Shea, and Clay Smith. Okay, let's skip straight to the second article, titled Accuracy of Cath Lab Activation Decisions for STEMI-equivalent and mimic ECGs, Physicians vs. an AI, specifically The Queen of Hearts by PM Cardio, out of the American Journal of Emergency Medicine. Now, we have talked about the Queen of Hearts before. Great name, by the way. This is an application which you could download on your phone right now. I've tried it. It's pretty neat. And it's a machine learning algorithm, the brainchild of Dr. Smith, of Dr. Smith's ECG blog, as well as all his team of ECG gurus. And they have put together this application which reads ECGs, including looking for OMIs, occlusion MIs, to help best diagnose patients who come in with concerning looking ECGs. Now, Dr. Smith, he puts out articles like I couldn't believe how many, this guy publishes like once a month for the last 10 years. It's incredible. And here he has another publication, which is just showing the worth of some of the work that he does. It's showing how good the Queen of Hearts actually can be. Now, most people are pretty good at spotting STEMIs. However, OMIs, there's a lot of patterns here which are prone to misinterpretation. It's hard to catch all of them. However, computers get pretty good at whatever we tell them to do. Whereas people, not that we can't get pretty good, but we're just, have you ever looked at an ECG? It's squiggly lines and this weird red grid. It looks like something a computer ought to be reading. It looks like a computer output more than it does something that you or I should be looking at. Now, that said, I love ECGs. I think ECGs are great. But heck, if a computer can do it better than me, at least in this regard, I think this makes sense, and I'm not surprised that this would be the case. So what they did was they asked emergency physicians and cardiologists from a couple of centers in the States. They asked all the ones at those shops. They asked 53 emergency physicians and 42 cardiologists to read 18 curated ECGs, which included a lot of difficult to read patterns, which are, they're OMI patterns. Something that was a little bit confusing to me was that they included one of these as a transient STEMI, which they said was a STEMI equivalent. But the way they talk about it, it sounds like the ECG that they gave them didn't have a STEMI on it anymore, and that they didn't show them the previous ECG, which did have a STEMI. And so presumably they were shown a normal ECG, or at least not a STEMI ECG or even an OMI ECG. So, I'm fine with this being a STEMI equivalent because you just had a STEMI and now you don't. You should probably get a cath pretty quickly. I don't see how they tested this one, but I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let that pass. And so how good did emergency physicians and cardiologists do? Well, they actually did the exact same, which is, I think, incredible. Way to go, emergency physicians. You're right up there with these cardiologists, but they were only 66% accurate. And that doesn't sound very good to me. That's all I got to say. It's probably pretty good. These are experienced physicians, but it doesn't sound very good in terms of sort of test characteristics. Now, when you compare that to the Queen of Hearts, the app got 89% accuracy, which is a lot better. The patterns with the lowest accuracy was a patient with left bundle branch block who actually had a negative scarbosa, so I guess these were false activations. And then this thing, which is right bundle branch block with a fascicular block, a left anterior fascicular block. Now, if you go look at Dr. Smith's ECG blogs, he seems to talk about this a little bit. It's not clearly, don't know that I would call this. These are messy looking ECGs. So I think it's just a little bit of confounding in the fact that this patient has a couple of blocks, and so it's hard to see that they have other signs of ischemia. And it's not that this in and of itself is a sign of ischemia. That's as far as I understand it. Now, this study actually aligns with previous data, and which is to say that, we generally suck at spotting OMIs on ECGs. However, the Queen of Hearts does a pretty good job. And we want to be spotting these things because patients who have NSTEMIs, that is, they could have an OMI, but they're STEMI negative, but they have occluded arteries, so they ought to be OMI positive. They have twice the mortality of patients who have just classic STEMIs. So there's a whole bunch of patients out there who have occluded arteries that we're not seeing on ECGs because they do not meet the standard STEMI criteria, and they're dying. So we really do want to catch these patients because they probably deserve to be revascularized. But I still have to say that has to be verified in prospective trials to really show the worth of the Queen of Hearts. So those are the trials I want to see, not more retrospective data, which is going to be what the next trial also is. All right, so in a spoonful, I expect one of the first things that emergency physicians hand over to the artificial intelligent gods to be ECG interpretation. Truth be told, it's probably going to be chest x-rays, but whatever. Now, this study shows us that the Queen of Hearts program significantly outperformed emergency physicians and cardiologists when interpreting STEMIs and STEMI-equivalents on ECG. And then we have the third article titled Failure of Standard Contemporary ST Elevation Myocardial Infarction Electrocardiogram Criteria to Reliably Identify Acute Occlusion of the Left Anterior Descending Coronary Artery, out of the European Heart Journal, Acute Cardiovascular Care. Now, this was a retrospective study on the DOMI Arigato retrospective case-controlled database where they evaluated if they just had the STEMI criteria versus also looking at OMIs and then melding that with cath data. How good were we at catching, patients who actually had occluded LADs? Now, I wonder if we're going to get to some point in the future where we have these patients who we suspect of an MI, and then we just do a coronary CT first. Now, I know it's a little bit complicated presently, but as technology gets better and better, I don't see why not. We could treat STEMIs like we do strokes. So you come in, you get an immediate CT, and if you have a large vessel occlusion, then we go and unblock it. That sounds like it makes sense. I wonder if we're going to get to that point at some point in the future. There are presently a bunch of holdups to this, but it seems feasible to me. Now, this study included patients presenting with ACS-type symptoms to 2 academic emergency departments and had OMIs confirmed by angiography. Among the 53 patients which had LAD occlusions, about 40% of them never met the STEMI criteria on ECG. Even on repeat ECGs, they never met STEMI criteria, but they had occluded LADs, which means 40% of these patients would have been missed by the traditional STEMI criteria. And we see, unsurprisingly, since they did not meet STEMI criteria, that these patients had much slower times, much slower door-to-balloon times, which of course they're going to have. They didn't have STEMI criteria in a system that probably operates by the STEMI criteria. And so these patients are not going to fare necessarily as well, or at least they're not going to get as fast treatment as we might want for them. Now, expert ECG interpretation, i.e. Dr. Smith, or an AI-powered ECG reading program, i.e. the Queen of Hearts, both had 100% sensitivity based on the first ECG at detecting LAD occlusion, whereas the guidelines, the STEMI criteria, would have only identified 62% of these cases. And if you have an LAD occlusion, it feels like a no-brainer that we should probably have to, unblock that. And something I thought that was significant here was that serial ECGs were not helpful in a lot of these cases. You got serial ECGs and they never met STEMI criteria. So sometimes when I get a kind of an iffy ECG, I repeat it and see if they develop a STEMI. But a lot of these patients are never going to develop a STEMI, but they are going to have an OMI the whole time. And so we really need to just spot it right up front. And so you see that there's a significant amount of patients that are coming in, 40% according to this study, that have serious occlusions, the LAD, that are only spotted if we're looking for OMIs. In a spoonful, the STEMI criteria missed nearly 40% of complete artery occlusions in this study, where OMIs would have identified all of them. These could have been found by the Queen of Hearts or a very experienced ECG interpreter if you're Dr. Smith. As things stand, these patients are currently receiving slower care, slower door-to-balloon times because we're not catching them as fast as we probably ought to be. Okay, so let's do a quick wrap up of all the things that we talked about today. That was all the articles that we had. From the second article, the Queen of Hearts wins again. AI outperforms physicians, that's emergency physicians and cardiologists at ECG interpretations. Then from the third article, 40% of complete artery occlusions are missed by the STEMI criteria, but the Queen of Hearts spotted them all. Now, if you are hearing this right now, then you are not a part of the members feed, and so you missed 3 articles from this past week. Every week we cover 5 articles, and the non-members only get 2 of them. What were those articles you missed? Well, we talked about everything you need to do for airway management in TBI patients. We talked about looking out for OMIs on post-ROSC ECGs, and how useful is that really? How many artery occlusions would we be missing? And then from the third article you missed, do antibiotics really help in cirrhotic patients with upper GI bleeds? Links to all the original articles can be found at journalfeed.org, or just follow the links in your show notes. Our goal here is for you to read less, learn more, and save lives, one spoonful at a time. Thank you.